The Pacers free agency previews by position continues today at the power forward spot, a position the Pacers have been chasing talent at since Kevin Pritchard took over, or basically since Thaddeus Young departed in 2018. We'll break that spot down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News, about to enter my fourth season on the beat. And today, we are diving into Pacers free agency at the fourth of the five positions, the power forward spot. Going to look at all the free agents available at that spot, why the Pacers would want one, the best guys on the market, realistic fits for the team to cut through the noise and figure out what the Pacers might do when free agency rolls around in just over 2 weeks. It is crazy how fast this month has gone by. Reminder, Locked On is partnering with Arcade One Up to give away 3 NBA JAM Shaq machines. Stay tuned later in the show to learn how to enter. But let's dive in to these power forwards in free agency, because the Pacers don't currently employ a lot of forwards. And joining forces with me today to discuss this position, the Pacers' needs, again, a spot that I feel like they've needed to fill since Thaddeus Young left over 4 seasons ago. Dave Searle, you might know him from Miller Time Pod years ago. He is back once again with me, the pod father of the Pacers. Dave, how you doing, man?
Feels weird to say years ago, but it also feels like decades ago in a certain way. Now, you're speaking of free agency, so you've been doing this for 4 years, so you're about to get your first real contract. What are your expectations? What are you looking for in the market, Tony?
That's right. I'm a restricted free agent, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't negotiate with other teams just yet after my rookie deals.
Ironically, that means that the Pacers actually can't acquire you because of their internal rule of not going after restricted free agents.
They haven't signed a second contract guy since Miles Turner, so hopefully I can buck the trend, right?
That's right.
So this spot is fascinating because I already mentioned it. They haven't had someone like who you naturally say is a 4 who's really solid since that. And because they started Turbonis, who are both good players, it hasn't felt like as much of a hole, but every good team has guys who are like nominally a 4 or a stretch 4 or a really good defensive 4. And like Torrey Craig could kind of do that. And Justin Holiday at his best could kind of do that. And O'Shea Brissett's good in the spot, but never anyone serious since that. And the crux of why the Pacers would want to sign a 4 is, beyond that they've been chasing this spot for years and have continued to sign forwards every summer, is that next year they go into the season with O'Shea Brissett, who's kind of a 4. Isaiah Jackson can sometimes play 4, but basically nobody at this spot. They need forwards desperately.
Yeah, and like you said, something they've been chasing for a long time. They traded Karis LeVert the first time because they were missing this particular guy.
Right.
There was a time where they thought they might even give a whirl at like starting like Jan Mahimi along with Miles Turner until he got a giant contract, and that made that completely impossible. And so, they've really struggled to kind of fill this hole in a real way. They might have some answers on the roster. I do kind of suspect that maybe TJ Warren might have been pegged to someday go into that role, and that's something that we might see into the season. But I think that they've placed a lot of bets on guys like Taylor and Brissett and, Torrey Craig, like you mentioned, and trying to find that guy to fill that particular role. As we look at these free agents, we might have this question pop up a couple times, which is, it always feels like a lot of guys that are good enough to really fill that kind of role reliably end up getting maybe a little bit too much money because it's just hard to find in a way. And it's that weird inefficiency between they're somewhat rare to find, but also when you get one, especially if you pay too much, it's not worth enough to the team. And so then it ends up being just a really hard thing to find like the right role, the right price, the right guy that could do it consistently. It's a lot harder to find than it does seem to be in theory. And so they'll probably take a couple more dice rolls either through the draft and free agency, but it's harder than it looks to find. And maybe it's going to be Thad.
Well, and part of the like, you see it so hard to find every summer. Like, that's why the Pacers, they signed Justin Holiday like 3 weeks into free agency his first year. And then they were like, oh, wow, he's good. We need to give him lots of years and money now to keep this guy. Doug McDermott the Spurs were like $50 million, great. Like you can play the four, awesome. You're on our team. Like those guys just get that kind of. He didn't get quite 50 million, but close. Like that is the demand that if you can play this position and have either a really strong offensive or defensive skill, that you'll get. And Thad might not get that much. We'll talk about him ironically today quite a bit. I feel like, but it's a really key spot. And again, Sabonis and Turner did well. Carlisle actually was the best coach at getting them to fit together. But all their warts made it so the Pacers never got the most out of that spot unless Brissett was in there and thriving like he did at the end of the Bjorkgren season. Or, man, Warren played the four okay in the bubble at times. Like they had fill-ins that made sense, McDermott occasionally as well. But they've never had the dude, and it's kind of been an imbalance that really hurt them. And part of why as well, I think since Thad left, their defense has really slipped. Every season it's gotten worse since he left, and there's a bajillion factors involved in that. Like more than just Thaddeus Young leaving, obviously. But not having a natural four, I mean, they get cooked by these strong fours. And I'm not talking the good stars. They get cooked by Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby kind of dudes who are good, but shouldn't be lighting you up for 30 all the time. And that is where you see, oh, wow, if they had any size or depth at that spot, that'd be great. Torrey Craig was supposed to be that guy. It kind of worked. It kind of didn't. Getting more guys and more bodies in that spot, especially in the modern NBA, is an absolute must. And the Pacers haven't done it for a while.
Yep, and maybe there will be some solutions on the free agent market to be able to find here, but I feel like it should be easier to do in a way, if that makes sense. Like just find a guy that has the body to play defense a little bit and knock down a couple of shots. That's part of, I think, one of the reasons, not just for spacing and not for just switchability on defense, but one of the reasons why it became so popular to do something like this is that it feels like it should be a little bit easier to be able to fill that in. But they definitely need that guy, and it's harder than it looks. What's the phrase that we were debating about earlier? It's easier in practice. It's easier said than done. There it is.
The worst phrase I'm.
How is that? How? That's a good phrase.
It's every single thing ever. Everything ever is easier said than done. What is easier to do than to say? Like breathing, maybe?
Yeah. Explain the process of breathing versus actually doing it. Yeah, there you go.
That's
There's one right there.
That's it.
Yeah. But it's, it's the feel. It's to say that it's easy to say, just find someone who's 6'7".
I know what it means. It just, I hate it because in practice it's stupid. Everything is easier. I want one basketball thing that's easier done than said. I have yet to find it. Maybe it's like, I don't know. I can't think of it.
Easier than that. I'll think about that. I'll come up with somebody.
That's an August podcast when free agency and summer league are all done, and I have to pivot to another topic. Basketball things that are easier done than.
Oh well, I was gonna say a really complicated dunk could take like a quick second, but it would be sometimes you watch the replay and it takes a while to understand and explain exactly what happened. Obviously it takes amazing athleticism to pull it off, but in a way, you can do it a little bit faster than you can explain it.
Okay, so back to power forwards. Yeah, I suppose that is true. The other, when we did small forwards earlier this week, Rhett Bauer and I, we were talking about they even have less there than at the four, but they need multiple of those guys. Like when I talked about guards, if they draft a guard, they don't need to sign one at all. Like even if they trade, they probably don't. And at the five, it's the same thing. At the 3 and the 4, the draft doesn't really complicate things to me. If you draft a 3 or 4, get another one. You need lots of forwards. And they, even in past, like TJ Warren's absence shouldn't be this massive to a team. Like you should be able to have someone to fill the role. He's a very good player. Losing him certainly will hurt. It should not be this hard of a hole to fill. And they were killed by that depth last season because guys that should be at that spot, like Justin Holiday and Torrey Craig, fell off and played other positions, and it was a mess. So even if they draft someone, unlike at other positions, they should still be targeting a lot of guys at the 4 or the 3. Honestly, both. And that's what makes it such an important discussion of who they get is they still need depth no matter what they do on draft night.
Yeah, it's the trade was a good one. I love the trade, but it's a little bit of proving the old adage of not trading big for small. Is that now that they have kind of gotten rid of that big? Sabonis is soaking up so many of those minutes, and now it's kind of like a big shrug as to how to fill those minutes. And as we're going to go and look through this free agent list, and we're not talking about the draft necessarily, but it's a little bit harder to plug that hole than it seems like on paper.
Shout out to Anthony Irwin, the old host of Locked On Lakers, for tweeting about that adage today and saying, has it been changed to don't trade a guard for a wing? Because the context was the D'Angelo Russell for Andrew Wiggins trade. Like, that's a home run trade for the Warriors. And everybody thought Wiggins was worse at the time. Like, having wings just is so important. And I know that we're not talking trades here, but that the crux of that discussion does play into what we're talking about, of the value of forwards. If you can get a good four, it's super hard to do and really important to do. Speaking of, let's talk about some of the best guys available at this. Hey guys, let's take one short little break here so I can talk to you guys about Bilpar, who are making the best tasting protein bars ever. Tons of Locked On Pacers listeners have tried them and told me they love them. And they get a new flavor, mud pie. You know how Bilpar is always coming out with new amazing flavors. Well, this time the mud pie flavor is the way to go. They got the mud pie and the mud pie puff. If you don't know what mud pie is, if you're a chocolate fan, sit down for this. It's rich whipped cream and chocolate mousse smothered in 100% chocolate, topped with cookies and cream crumble. And all the Built Bars are delicious. They're all 100% covered in chocolate. They come in a bunch of awesome flavors. My favorite's the peanut butter brownie. The cookie dough one is really good. They had a great one around St. Patrick's Day that they haven't had back for a while because they do all these seasonal flavors, but they're all delicious. Most of them are really healthy too. For example, the mud pie, 150 calories, 8 grams of sugar, tons of protein right in there. You've got to try them yourself. And again, all 100% covered in real chocolate. It's basically a candy bar. Go try them. Go to built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 when you check out. You get 15% off your order. That promo code again is LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
One name pops up, I would assume, as someone that would be the best that could theoretically fill the role, which would be Miles Bridges, right? I would assume that would be sort of the hypothetical number one of someone that would be that kind of hybrid 3-4 that would have a chance. Just on pure talent, he'd be the best. Would that be correct? You would agree with that?
I would. We talked about him in the small forwards episode as well. I view him more as a 3 than a 4. But even if you want to pocket him at the 4, like, yes. I mean, he's a stud, and there's probably only 2 of these, him and Ayton. And we'll talk about Ayton on the Centers episode. There's only like 2 actually very good restricted free agents who are kind of on the Pacers timeline and maybe wiggle freeable. I don't think the Hornets will let Bridges get away. It makes sense to them to just give him 5 years at slightly less than the max. But yeah, if he even becomes sort of available, because that team's going to be super expensive kind of soon, yes. I mean, he even at the 3 or the 4, he makes a ton of sense for the Pacers.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's an interesting scenario for the Pacers because it doesn't seem like they're going to be maxing out cap room anytime soon. And, that they have Halliburton and you have Duarte and you have Jackson. And you're going to get 1 rookie, maybe 2, maybe 3 first rounders. It kind of just depends how it goes. I think they're going to try to take a second plus the Cavs first and get kind of that low 20s, in the 20s, that kind of Isaiah Jackson kind of trade. If there's a guy in that territory that they like, maybe they look at something like that, maybe something bigger. I mean, all the discussions about some of the higher ticketed guys to try to get another first rounder in the mix talks about the old, putting the Portland core together and try to replicate that sort of thing. That's going to create a lot of players on rookie deals that are all going to be going kind of at once. And so if the Pacers, I mean, hypothetically, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but say they get 3, right? And then they have Halliburton and Jackson and Duarte all kind of coming not quite on the exact same time, but they're sort of cascading into the future. All those guys are underpaid. And if you look at, say you just straight out max out Bridges, like full max, I mean, every penny that he could possibly get, then you'd be looking at Bridges plus all those rookies are going to be underpaid. And there's a way of, I mean, it doesn't matter how much anybody is making until you try to sign a free agent, you can't. So, and I don't think that the Pacers are really likely to be in that situation at any time in the next 2 years, maybe 3, maybe 4. If it goes to 5, that's when I think it gets real messy. And that's really a situation where if you have to deal with Bridges in that 5th year of a max deal, but if it's 4 years,
they can't give him 5 years though. They can't do it.
Well, they can if they sign a trade, right?
No, can't do 5 years on a sign and trade.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize. So there'd be 4 in that sort of.
You idiot! How dare!
I thought they traded, but I apologize.
The thing is, so I don't know that the Pacers think this way, but I know other teams have in the past, and I'm like, OKC's going to run into this eventually. Okay, you pay Bridges, and then in 2 years, Halliburton gets the max, and then Duarte gets whatever 4 for 100. Boom, you're at the cap. That's it. Like eventually, it gets very hard to add around that. So if you are, I think maxing Bridges, I'm not quite all the way there. I get why the Pacers would, but that will be the problem. Is like if it doesn't click perfectly, that's it. That's your team. Like you might be stuck if it doesn't work out. And that's fine because he's good and will have value. But it's very risky, especially in the plan you've described, where they have all these guys on rookie deals because they all become expensive at some point. It's the last year of that Bridges deal that we have just drawn up out of thin air. So, yeah, it makes sense. But there will be a point where you're like, oh, crap, we couldn't use
Yeah.
space and this is our team.
Well, that's where a hypothetical and now not logistically possible fifth year really becomes a problem because everybody you get this year would
Right.
have their contracts up at that same time. But another benefit of doing this is if it doesn't click and it doesn't work out, well, then you kind of create cap space. You have a $35 million expiring contract that's happened at the exact same time that you're finally signing the last deals to balloon it up. That's kind of, if it was next year, if it just, there's a lot of different scenarios in which it wouldn't work out. And there's a lot of teams that I think would make a bad decision by doing this. But the Pacers, by trying to load up on so many rookies this year, having one expensive guy for 4 years, the timing is exactly perfect. And it's the one chance that they would be able to do it. Because they wait until next year, it blows everything up. And this kind of scenario doesn't really.
I actually think next year is okay because that's the last year before Halliburton gets crazy expensive. Like he's a max dude for sure to me, right?
Right.
You have one more chance at it. And next year's free agency class is much better. But there are ways that they could sign Bridges and still have space next summer. So it doesn't really matter. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yeah, next year's class being so good, especially compared to this year's, is really important. Let's talk about some other guys here. Bridges was on the small forward list on Spotrac, so we talked about him Tuesday, but I agree he can play the 4 pretty well. Going through the power forward list that they have, it is very unappealing. Two guys will be free agents.
PJ Tucker number 2.
Yeah, 2 guys will be free agents who made more than $10 million last season at the power forward spot on Spotrac. That's Thad, coming off that deal he signed out after leaving the Pacers with Chicago, and Taurean Prince with Minnesota. Now, here's the thing. Very unappealing names. Taurean Prince, great fit with the Pacers right now.
Okay. I was going to say, if this was last year, or if the Pacers did well this year and they were hanging on and they were still keeping the train moving, I'd be like, Prince, that's the guy. I mean, it's Pacers all over it. He's 28 years old. He's entering his prime. He's underrated. He's not very flashy. He can knock down threes. He's a great defender. He's a team first guy, blah, 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 blah. He's like perfect. He's exactly who they would sign. It'd be day one of free agency. They'd announce Taurean Prince, 3 years, 40 million or whatever, and then they'd be off. But where they are at right now, I think it's still a fit. But he did say at the end of the season, like, "Oh, I'm coming back. They'll re-sign me. I think it'll be fine."
What we talked about with the threes, and this is kind of like a latch disc kind of effort, but like, let's say he's still out there like 4 days into free agency, and the Pacers still have some space. Give him a big 1-year deal, and then February comes around, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, hey, contending teams, you want this really good wing we have on an expiring contract? He's probably too good to fall into that scenario. We talked about it under the guise of like Otto Porter and Ben McLemore, and Taurean Prince is too good for that, but I do think at the 3 and the 4, what you're saying is absolutely correct. Like he'll probably go back to Minnesota, and they're not really coming off of 25 wins in the position to like give 3 to 50 or whatever for Taurean Prince. But that kind of stuff does make sense to me. And there are guys at the spot that make sense. You also just need 3s and 4s to see what they are with Tyrese Halliburton and Rick Carlisle's system, because they didn't see that at all this past season. So there is some merit to valuable vets at this spot, but less so than some young guys or some positional versatile guys.
Yeah, I think it's something that, especially if you're just kind of looking at a roster very broadly and thinking entirely about the future, you forget about the fact that they got to go out in October and start playing games, and being able to have a decent number of players that can hit shots. I mean, you just want basic spacing, and you want to make sure that if Halliburton makes a good play, that the guy who catches it has a pretty good shot and a chance of knocking down a shot. And I think that you want a team that plays competent defense on a night-to-night basis just to kind of get that habit going. I think that all makes sense. And so I'd be, again, for all the reasons that you said, and especially if the contract is maybe even just a tad, a little bit more than market value, the Lakers or the Warriors or whoever it is that's missing a wing that's trying to go for a title next year is not going to care if they have to pay $2-3 million for 1 or 2 years to get a guy like that. So I think that's a good option if he's open to leaving Minnesota, which it doesn't sound like he is, but hey, money talks.
Thad's a good fit with the Pacers again as well. Seems like per every Thaddeus Young indication, he will probably sign with a contender. but if the Pacers did open up the checkbook, he'd be a good fit. After those 2 guys, there are some good players like PJ Tucker. If he declines his player option, which he should, would be good, but he's old as hell and will probably return. to Miami. JaMychal Green did opt in for sure, so he won't be a free agent because he got traded. Jeff Green, I've always thought is good. He'll probably return to Denver. He's got a player option. Bobby Portis for sure going back to Milwaukee. And then it's just either young, unproven guys or some vets that make no sense for the Pacers, unless you feel like someone is actually good on the list that I have not talked about yet.
No. I mean, I think it's it'd be funny to see PJ Tucker get the War Stories contract. That's always funny when they're just, he's just there to tell battles of the glory days in between, the bus rides to the game. There's a really young guy that actually showed a lot of promise last year. That was actually kind of a lottery pick that I think that would be a good investment for a young team like that, and that's Jalen Smith.
Hey, unfortunate. It sucks that he's listed as a power forward. I know.
Yeah.
It would take. I mean, I'm not going to remove it from the table yet, but pretty much, if you went Jalen Smith back on the Pacers, I still maintain the same tune I've always had. What you are hoping on draft night is the Thunder draft Chet, and then the Pistons draft a center, and then the Spurs draft a center, and then all of a sudden they don't need bigs, and Jalen Smith's out of options. That's like the only way that there's any chance that he comes back to the Pacers.
Yeah, and then that situation where all the young teams that just have effort money that are just could say, well, here's $15 million for 1 year, who cares? Like, just see what you got, If they don't have playing time, it is a legitimate concern for him. I mean, $15 million is a big number. He'd take it from anybody. But, if somebody says, here's $9 million, and then he's like, well, I'm not going to play, so what's the point? I don't think it's worth it long term. I'm going to actually tangibly hurt my long-term value if I don't get actual rotation minutes. And so that's the pitch. And if he likes Carlisle enough and all that sort of jazz, I think I would see it possible to turn down a couple million. But if he gets like 3 years of decent money, then, obviously he's going to take it. And I can't see, again, only just because of rotation minutes, but like any team that's got a decent amount of cap room, he seems like the perfect kind of guy. Because I was looking down a list for a guy like him for the Pacers. Like, just some dude that has a decent amount of potential, throw too much money at them, see if it works for a couple years, get some decent play. He kind of seems like that dude, which is a bummer.
Well, hey, boy, do I have one name I would like to talk about of that vein. Let's pivot to realistic targets. Let's take one more short little break here, guys, so I can talk about Arcade 1-Up Boom Shakalaka. We've got big news here at Locked On Pacers. The one, the only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1-Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing back the best game ever, but they've made it bigger than ever with a Shaq edition machine. People are obsessed with NBA Jam, and we're back in the day, and you can now once again play hoops with the NBA legends in the arcade classic, jump clear across the court, and set the ball on fire. And one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters required. Compete with your friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade1up.com. For an estimated early September ship date, Arcade 1-Up is the place for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others, starting at just $3.99. Check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number 1up.com/lockedon. You've got until July 8th to enter to win NBA Jam Shaq edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today. Who are you going to play with? Dave, I think you are on the money. Young dudes who have some flash of potential. What I've been talking about a lot when I've done these positional previews is the second contract guy, right? That's the term that's always thrown around. And when you have to come off of 25 wins, if you can find value on those second contracts, that helps you build a good team long term with a sustainable cap sheet and get good young players. And so I apparently am the last person left who would like to talk about this player in a Pacers context. He absolutely sucked for the Sacramento Kings. No doubt in my mind. Should not have gone second in the draft at all. He got picked over Luka Doncic. That's hilarious in retrospect. What are the Kings doing? Also got traded to the Pistons and then was pretty damn good in a new context at putting the ball in the basket, grabbing it off the rim, making plays happen. Marvin Bagley. Not a good player. Very unproven, but there's some value to squeeze there to me. And when you look at what the Pacers should go for in this spot, when I talk about realistic targets, it's either guys who are young and fit their timeline or guys who can be a sage vet and play multiple positions. And Bagley is certainly young and on their timeline if he's amenable to switching teams, because Detroit did turn out to be a good home for him.
If it was old school podcast days, I'd have a long list of notes here to go through. I made a mental note, and that's why you don't rely on mental notes to mention. I mean, yeah, Bagley seems like that exact kind of guy that I'm talking about. Being able to get a guy who obviously was high in the draft, sign him for probably maybe an irresponsible amount of money, but only for a year or 2 years or something like that. It makes all the sense in the world for the Pacers to try to do, because I mean, like, they are going to have to put money into the team to be able to hit the freaking salary floor, by the way. And if they make a trade that involves Brogdon and Hield, etc., and they get off of some of that money, then they're going to be in real trouble in reaching that kind of salary floor. So they're going to have to spend money on somebody. And yeah, I agree. That's actually a good fit just in general because of talent, and also because, with Bridges is one reason why I was interested in Bridges. Getting guys that will going to take lobs from Halliburton, like guys that have the athleticism
Hey,
to
can
kind
jump.
A, because it's fun, and B, because, to kind of exercise that muscle a little bit, get guys that are decent running mates for Halliburton. I do agree. I mean, I think that obviously length will matter. I think that there isn't a 2-year contract that you could give him that I wouldn't agree with. I mean, obviously, for something wild.
2 for 60.
2 for 60.
Dave said it's fine, guys. Dave said it's fine.
I mean, like any rational
Right. I get
1 or 2-year deal, I think I'd just be like, yeah, what the hell? Who cares?
It's funny because going through most every other position, like there's a lot of young, and he's restricted, so he might not even be possible to get. Detroit's probably going to want to keep him because he was good for them. But like every other position, there's like 3 or 4 of these, former high pick that didn't pan out, or a young dude that's like just scratching the surface of what he can be in the future. At the 4, it's Bagley and Jalen Smith, who you already talked about, and then Bruno Fernando, kinda. He's actually not very good. I mean, Pascal is okay. Claxton's like okay. It's pretty weak in terms of the young guys. Trying to squeeze out value in that way at this spot will be hard for the Pacers unless they draft someone. Then they'll have a young guy at the 4.
Yeah, and there was a lot of Googling that I had to do as we were looking through this list. And remember, is that real? Is this a prank? Is this guy really in the NBA into the 20s? That's not a good sign. So, yeah, free agency might not be the best place to take a risk on that sort of dude. And but it's just a little note for the future. This isn't that crazy. It's not that unusual. And finding a guy that's going to be able to fill those 4 minutes without breaking the bank, or that's super talented, obviously that would be the greatest thing, but someone that can fulfill those skills is a good priority for the draft, and something that the role TJ Leaf was born to play. Unfortunately, this is the TJ Leaf hole that they're trying to fill right now.
Please allow me to lob a few vet names at you for reasons of positional versatility, because even guys like Terry Taylor were playing the 5 last season, right? Like guys were playing out of position and helping with depth because the Pacers were so injured. So it's not crazy to me that they would sign like a vet deep on their roster. So the one I think of is like Bielitsa, who is killing it for Golden State right now. So I don't know why he'd switch teams, but if he's available, like an old dude who can shoot at the 4, stretch 4 is usually a good use of money, and he can play 4 or 5. Chris Boucher from Toronto can play 4 or 5, although I don't know why Toronto would let him go. And Dean Wade with the Cavs, if they decline his club option to try to give him a raise, if you're the Pacers, try to wiggle him free because he can shoot and do stuff off the bounce. He's an okay player. But even the vets, I mean, not a lot of them can play multiple positions. It's a rough crew. Trey Lyles, for Indy native, he's okay. But this is not a good cast of names at the 4.
We didn't mention TJ Warren, I don't think, in a serious conversation.
He is on the 3s list, but if yes, he could play the 4 and would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, obviously they'll have a pretty good inside track into how healthy he is. But it's what's your read on what you think kind of contract that Warren would get?
Either one that's a ton guaranteed in the first year and then totally non-guaranteed in second, third, fourth, whatever seasons, or one that is kind of strongly guaranteed every year but has like team option, ton of unlikely bonuses, injury protections like Jonathan Isaac and Embiid had. I think it'll be one of those two things. Both of them kind of let him get back on the market if he's good, but also give the team a bunch of protections in case he's not and he gets hurt again. So I think it'll be a really weird and creative contract, and there are multiple ways to do it. I think if it's a team that's like the Grizzlies or like the Blazers who are trying to be good, they'd probably like to do the like 3 for 50 route, where the first year is a ton guaranteed and the last 2 years are completely non-guaranteed. And if you're a team like the Pacers, you'd probably be more willing to do the second route, where you guarantee more every year, but you have all the fancy bells and whistles in there, so you don't shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah. And I think that if he was on another team, I think that would be something that would be even attractive in that scenario. And the fact that they know probably a little bit more about where he's at injury wise, another team might help inform that decision. But it seems like he does like it in Indiana. He obviously tries a lot on defense. That's always something that you want on any of those guys that you're going to bring in to fill this role. And he can shoot. So, I think that is someone that could fill that role pretty well. And the inside track on Warren, both on the injury history and just the fact of knowing the guy, could be a good way to kind of secure that. And like we said, they're going to have a ton of room. So burning a little bit of cash in the first couple of seasons, it literally matters to nobody that doesn't have the last name Simon.
Exactly right. Anything you feel like we missed at this 4 spot?
I don't think so. I mean, it's slim pickings. If you could be a big Emerald Schofield fan or something, but no, I think that we covered it.
Yeah, it's the same thing that I talked about at the very end of the small forward show. But if you flip the old Spotrac page to 2023 free agents at this spot, suddenly guys like Porzingis and Kevin Love and Draymond Green and Gallinari and Jeremy Grant and Christian Wood and Kyle Kuzma and Larry Nance are all there. And you're like, hey, those are really good names. Maybe we should save our money for a year and then do it. It's the same thing with the threes. They got to have somebody. They got to have people to put on the floor. That's why 1-year deals make a lot of sense. But we'll see what the Pacers ultimately do. Mr. Searle, thank you for the time. Where can people find you and all your lovely thoughts about the Indiana Pacers?
Twitter at Miller Time Pod. It's a thrilling experience.
Rip the Fieldhouse. What we could have said.
Yeah. Yep. That's experiment that was worth doing. But RIP the Fieldhouse.
We tried our best. Everybody, thank you a ton for listening. Tomorrow will be the final prospect preview I'm going to do for the show. Looking at Tari Eason from LSU. Really psyched to get one out about him because, spoiler, I have him in my top 10 now. Very excited to break down his game. So thank you all for listening. Hope you had a great week, and we will see you tomorrow.